Hello and welcome to A Sense of Centerville and Washington Township, your place for stories about ordinary and extraordinary places and residents in the Centerville and Washington Township area. I'm Susan from Centerville-Washington History, and I look forward to hearing your story. Today my guest is Mark Metzger. Mark grew up in Wooster, Ohio, and came to Dayton to attend Wright State University to study theater and directing management. This led to employment in 1996 to provide programming to the newly renovated Washington Township Town Hall Theater. In 2016, Mark became the recreation director for the township, where he oversees Town Hall Theater, along with a wide variety of activities, programs, and facilities that make up the RecPlex. He and his wife, Annie, and 3 boys moved to Washington Township about a year ago to be closer to Incarnation Elementary and to the RecPlex. Mark serves as president to the Americana Festival and is a member of Centerville Noon Optimist. Thanks, Mark, for being here.
Thank you. That was a great introduction.
Well, thanks.
It's a mouthful.
I know. I tried to edit it, but there's just so much information. So it
just means I'm old.
Well,
right.
I'm older than you. So since you started working for the Township Theater, can you tell us how you got started there?
That's a funny story. I went to Wright State. That's how I got into the area and studied directing. So people go, "Oh, you're a theater. You must be an actor." I'm like, not really. I was in high school, but I was more behind the scenes. I'd worked at the Dayton Playhouse, which was my first municipal job working for the city of Dayton. So I was putting money into OPERS at that time.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Never thought that was going to amount to anything. And my dream was to go to Seattle and make it big, right? Or at least work in the theater. And I packed up. I had a minivan with manual transmission, which is really rare. As it turned out, it was a problem. So I packed everything up and I headed home to Newark, Ohio at that time to say goodbye to mom and dad and then head out. Because I know Newark's not on the way to Seattle. But my transmission went out just north of Columbus. And my nest egg was immediately taken up by repairing that vehicle. And in the intervening time, I had a conversation with Linda Madden, who worked at the rec center. I had directed a show for the township contractually that fall. And it had gone well, and I was going to do that and move on. Children's theater was maybe not what I planned to do.
Yeah.
But I went out to Seattle. I flew out there at that point while I was waiting for my vehicle to be fixed and look at some things. And I'm a fairly practical person, and I had the opportunity of Seattle without actually anything tangible or this opportunity in Washington Township to manage a theater. That's, here's this theater, here's the keys. We just renovated it. You can do whatever you want, kind of. And so I took that opportunity and really never looked back. But it was not a plan. I certainly thought I might get away, maybe do it for 5 years. And I always tell people I got away for a year. My wife was out in San Francisco getting her PharmD degree at that point. And I went out there for a year, worked for the California Theater Center. And I always tell people I got a year off for good behavior, and now I'm back. So just have loved the community and the opportunity to create kind of something special in a vacuum at that point. The building was not really occupied. It had just been renovated, and there was a lot of potential, which is a dream of anybody graduating college at that point, like blank slate.
Yeah, that is, and it's been great for our family. We've loved, those shows. The children's theater is amazing. You have a wonderful facility that's just been renovated again.
Right,
Yeah.
Right. I've been around long enough to do another renovation, I guess.
Yes.
Although those seats the seats that we recently replaced were from like the 50s. And I remember when I took the job, that was like the first thing I identified as something we probably need to change, because even that renovation hadn't changed the seats. And, nobody wants to come and sit for an hour or 2 hours in a narrow seat, because back in the day, seats were narrower. We all got bigger as the years progressed, and not particularly comfortable. So now it's a comfortable experience to attend, which is nice.
Yeah, it is. Can you talk a little bit about Town Hall history, the Town Hall Theater history?
Well, that's part of what attracted me to the job.
Mhm.
I've always loved history. I like that it's an old building with all its problems and challenges.
Mhm.
But I love that I always tell the story. So the Doolittle Tavern was there first.
Mhm.
And then along comes Washington Township, tears down the bar and the tavern, if you will, and builds the township building there. But that was what happened in the early 1900s. 1909 was when it was dedicated. And I got to help with the centennial in 2009, and just researching the role that building had played was very enlightening. And it also was just filled with kind of fun anecdotes about the building's history. For starters, the city of Centerville and Washington Township shared the building. So you had both entities, government offices in that building for a long period of time until the 70s mid 70s when the city moved down to its current location on Spring Valley. So just the idea that everyone was in the same building working together, that was also managed or taken care of by someone who lived upstairs. So the fire chief, Louis Campbell, lived upstairs and maintained the building, and then ran the fire department, which was in the back of the building. So we were very consolidated back in those days.
Yeah, and just for reference, when I had an interview with Bill Gall, and he talked a little bit about that story, the fire chief. So at that time, yeah.
Well, it's really interesting to go back and look and see. It can be humbling. We were not the first theater group that was in that building. That building had theater in it from the day it was built. It had performances by a family of singers that opened the building, and they had throughout the years always either vaudeville shows coming in or in-house local production performances. Gordon Jump performed there. Everybody kind of knows that story. Lots of people have kind of come through and gone on. And then they did that when I was there with the children's theater. We had so many kids come through and go on and do great things, both in theater and in regular life. So theater can be a building block for a lot of different things, as I would find out, I guess. But the history of the building. And the other piece that I think you take away when you look at something like Town Hall is, for example, parking, which is like a big deal right now uptown. There's a lot of amazing, awesome things going on right now. And there's just not enough parking, and they're working on that. But it reminded me, and I reached out to some of the staff at Centerville-Washington History, and I said, I remember seeing a picture about the fire chief, and he couldn't get out of the fire station because there was a barricade and property owners didn't want to have, share. And guess what? Yep, that's exactly what had happened. It was back in that time. And here we are again, in some ways revisiting some of those same themes. If people say history repeats itself. Yeah, it does.
It does, yeah.
And it can be humbling because you think, well, now is the moment of ultimate achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Uptown is as glorious as it ever has been. Not exactly true, right? There's ebbs and valleys throughout the history of our community, which is what's fun about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's still changes to come. I mean,
absolutely.
it's never done. So, but yeah, I agree with you that I think things are looking great right now. It's been fun to see the changes and see, more parking
Yes.
available, and there's more things to come to see. So that's good uptown. Okay, so a little bit of history about the RecPlex next.
Yeah, so the RecPlex I know a little less about, only because I was working at Town Hall for so long, but I can talk about, it really all comes down to Tom Stoltz, who owned Countryside Nursery, and really that plot of land down there. And as we've done a lot of work on the park more recently, so much of that story has kind of come to light or been refreshed in our minds. But he originally donated part of that property to the YMCA, and they built that. Part of what the facility is now was built then, locker rooms and a gym and reception area essentially. And he donated that property for that piece. And then that was in the 77, I think. And then in 1990, he donated the rest of the land. And that became really Countryside Park, and that allowed us to start to build out, because the township took over, bought the Y somewhere around 1989, 88, 89. And that's when they built the pool. Mm-hmm. And then a few years later, after Mr. Stoltz donated the rest of the land, that's when we built the fitness wing and the men's locker room and the weight room and all those sorts of things. The walking track were added in those years. So big debt of gratitude to Tom for donation of that size. And people don't talk too much about him. He also donated land that's at Stubbs Park. And it's very obvious what he donated because he also improved the land. So you see bridges and improvements, shelter houses that he built, things like that have a very distinctive look. And those are all little pet projects of his, as he had a reputation for not ever stopping. Like, he would just move and work all the time. Anybody that met him describes him that way. And also a little eccentric, let's be fair. But he worked nonstop. He was a workaholic, and he would do that in the evenings. He would build bridges and enlarge the ponds that are there. Those ponds were his creation, ostensibly originally to water the nursery stock, but became recreational pieces and are now centerpieces of the park master plan. But so that's kind of the history. Is somewhere in early 2000s, we had the opportunity to buy this former Centerville Cinemas, which I had attended movies there. So
Me too,
I've been around. Yeah.
Saw Titanic there.
I saw Shakespeare in Love. That's the one, that and The English Patient. So I must have been into long romantic movies at that point. So we converted that building piece by piece. And most recently with the addition of the Joyce Young Center, which is really a transplant of Hither Green. Yeah. Yes, it really turned out nice. So when Hither Green closed and relocated, that became part of our programming. And Cynthia Fraley came over with that, who was the executive director for Hither Green, and ran that for about 5 years before her retirement. So a lot of credit goes to her for shepherding that transition, trying to go from your own entity to kind of a part of being a larger entity. But overall super successful at that. And it finished the renovations of that building. For a good long time, the last few movie theaters had not been developed for lack of funds. And also we didn't need the space. So they were just kind of sitting empty and filling up with, wooden light storage, things like that. So it became a storage facility. So it was nice to see that. And it also kind of brought a lot of life during the day to a building that was typically really heavy, used for camp, after school programs. And kind of that was it. So that kind of finished or made the picture more complete. And so you have those two buildings. And of course the town hall, when the government center moved over to McEwen Road, that freed up that building for other uses. That's about the time I came in. And that's part of our portfolio as well. So, and that's also the home to the Americana Festival. So,
okay. So there's offices upstairs.
Yes.
Still. Yeah.
Yep.
I actually want to focus just a smidge on the Stoltz building is one of the buildings. Now you use that mostly. It's named after him because that was the countryside nursery. And now it's used mostly for storage, I assume, and for maintenance things. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
It's a really interesting building. I actually had the opportunity to give a tour of this just earlier this week to Brady Kress, with Carolyn Park and Dayton history. And he was just fascinated and curious about it as well. And I had the opportunity to include Vinnie Keene, who's been there longer than I've been. And interestingly enough, had a fair amount of fun anecdotes of crossover. So he grew up in the community and had friendships with people who knew or worked for Tom. He never met Tom, but there were multiple anecdotes like that. But it's an interesting building because there's a maintenance area in the back that was added on by Tom Stoltz for maintenance. The center of the building on the lower floor was the store. And then he also built, this is the part that's interesting, he built apartments, a total of, I think, 4 apartments in the building, kind of expanded it. The second floor has 2 apartments, and then there were like 3 apartments, very small studio apartments on the lower floor. And he built a pool, which, just you think about it, why a pool? A very nice, elegant pool that's since been filled in. And so he was in the business of not only creating apartments and rent, like being a landlord, but also providing these amenities in addition to the park setting, like a swimming pool. And it seems weird until you think, well, a lot of apartment complexes have swimming pools. So that's really all he was doing. There had been another house there that was torn down that he had also rented out. So he worked all the time. The building is unique and just a maze of little tiny rooms and crevices because it has the exterior lines that people go, oh, wow, it's kind of like, mid-century kind of to it, but in the inside is just is like it would be a great haunted house.
Yeah, I was
Lots of little
thinking,
tiny rooms.
Yeah.
And it's been used for that before by the rec center, the parts of that
Right.
building.
Well, the arts used to be done in there, the art classes in that facility.
Yeah, we had glass etching as well in there. And then,
Yeah.
of course, the camps operated out there for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Building's still on a septic tank. It has
Is it
a regular
really?
well.
Oh, my goodness.
So it's seen better days. But as you say now, it's mostly storage.
Yeah. That log cabin do you know anything about that log cabin?
I know, I could try to find the dates here, but I know that it came to us from Hillsborough and was relocated here. I think we handled that. We probably did that with a partner. I can't necessarily speak to that as to why it ended up here. I'm going to guess that your organization played a part in that. But a lot of people ask, was this here? Was this Tom Stoltz's house? No, it's a transplant. And it was restored and then placed there. There's been some talk over the years of relocating it, putting it in a different spot that's a little more centralized. But that's a lot of work to do too.
Moving the log cabin, yes.
I mean, yes, it is. And of course, we use one of the things that makes Woodland Lights kind of unique is you really have this quiet, personal, one-on-one with Santa, because we do Santa in the cabin. And so even on the coldest nights, my understanding is Santa gets pretty hot in there with the fireplace going. But it is kind of unique because the door closes and it's just you and your family. And I've always thought that's kind of special. So that's how we use that room for the most part. Yeah. The rest of the year, it just kind of is a picturesque piece of the park.
No, and I love, that's a beautiful park, just walking around. I was a lifeguard for a lot of years and loved looking out at seeing people in the snow walking their dogs through that beautiful park. So that's a part of my history that I've enjoyed. Let's talk about the recent levy and what will continue to happen because of that. That benefit.
Well, I was brushing up on my history here to prepare for this interview, and we opened with a $1.5 million levy back in the day, and then it, once things got kind of established, we backed it down. And I think at 30 years or plus where we are now, the most recent levy went back to 1.5, and a big part of that is you've reached a point where that investment needs to be taken care of in a greater way than just maintaining, right? So we've kind of come full circle a bit there. So some of that is for that, and I think some of it is, the cost of doing business is more than it was just a few years ago. And we all kind of know that cost of staff and keeping qualified staff, and the cost of just stuff, paper towels, toilet paper, everything costs more. We all know this, right? But a significant part, or not a significant part, but a part of that, I would say about 0.3 mils of that levy is dedicated to the park. And the idea is that we have really done, it sounds bad, we've done little with the park other than maintain it. The gift sustained itself for a period of time, but over that time, the front pond is filled in. The secondary pond behind the rec center had also filled in. Bridges are starting to show their age. Those things that were there when we got the gift are starting to end their useful life. And I think now's the time to invest in that and you take care of the gift that you were given. And that's where we're at now. So a lot of that levy discussion was about what can we do to help. We have just this one park. And for us, that journey also then meant being reminded that it's a neighborhood park for the people that live there. It's a programming space, which is generally how we looked at it, is it's a place for camp, it's a place for our sports and youth leagues, things like that. And it's also a destination park for people who truly love that space. It's a fairly unique space. It was originally a nursery, and Tom also planted lots of interesting trees. So it's a bit of an arboretum. So it's not just your usual park. It's a very little different. And so it means different things to different people. And so it's time to take care of it. And that was a big push behind our levy.
Yeah, there's a beautiful weeping willow right over the back pond that is beautiful, especially at Woodland Lights time, I think, because it's just the reflections look so gorgeous. I actually wanted to touch on one more thing, is the recent renovations to the fitness. The fitness that it's so improved. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's funny. So I've been working for the township for a long time. And of course, even when I was barely aware of those rec people, when I was working at the theater, I'd come down and I'd hear, how small our fitness center was. And one of my first roles when I took this job was, getting to know people and talk to patrons. And yes, if you talk to our fitness patrons, they always joked that they were like the stepchildren of the department, look at this little space we have. So it was a known quantity. It was, it is what it was for a long time, but it was time. And what happened is COVID came, and we used the gym that was next to the fitness center to accommodate all the spacing and distancing requirements. So all the equipment moved in there. And I remember standing there one day realizing that there was no way you're going to put the genie back in the bottle.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because you would look at it and you go, well, this all looks really nice. All of this was in there. How's that even possible now? And so that epiphany kind of then made the rest of it start to fall into place. And really the only thing that allowed us to truly do the project was because during COVID, we took a pretty sizable financial hit because about 50% of our budget comes from user fees, and we were closed. So it hit us in a way that it didn't really hit other departments in the township. But because COVID relief it ultimately would provide funding for lost revenue, that helped us regain that piece of it, which then allowed us to build on that improvement that we made to the fitness center. But we had to dig deep to make it happen too. But it was a priority. And yes, it's a project. I chuckled when you mentioned it because it's a project that it's not new construction, it's old construction, it's renovation. And even a 30-year-old building has weird things that have happened or changed or are reflected in the plans. And so there have been lots of challenges as we've gone through the project. And we're just now getting to the windows, which were really the signature piece of this design. So that it's a former gym, it's now a fitness center, and it will overlook the ponds through these big four big glass windows, 16 feet wide, full view of the park, bring the park inside. Mm-hmm. But we're hoping to finish those by the end of the year here. So, but it's like any project, you just kind of want it to be done now.
Yeah. It's hard to have things hanging over like that.
It does. It's any renovation. The joke at the township, of course, is that the fire station is beautiful and was done within the same time frame. But it is all new construction, to be fair.
Yeah.
And there are less challenges sometimes with that. So
yeah, new construction, it's definitely easier.
It does. It moves.
But it's going to be great. And it already is fantastic. So we're happy to have it.
It's a big improvement for sure.
Okay, let's talk about Countryside Park. We did a little bit, but let's go into Woodland Lights and how Woodland Lights came to be and how it's used in Countryside Park.
It's 31 years this year, I think, that it's been around. And it all really started with decorating some trees, putting some lights up.
Do you know whose idea or?
Yes. So Dale Berry, who's a township trustee, his former wife was involved in that. And it really did start as simple as that. And then it just kind of builds. Like, it would be nice to decorate those trees that are out by the road, at the rec center. And I think it evolved from that and started to kind of take some legs. And it was, for a time, this will sound weird. It was a kind of full township affair. And somewhere along the line, it became ours. Really exclusively, mostly ours, right? In terms of the putting it up. Once it became routine, I think is why. And it's been around all that time. And for the most part, Vinny Keene, who's been with us 27 years, he's obviously been here for most all of it. Mm-hmm. He's the keeper of all those stories. And truly is the force behind Woodland Lights. And then Linda Madden, who was with the department for a very long time, was involved with that event and is responsible for a lot of the things that we all have come to kind of think about: the horse rides, carriage rides, Santa in the cabin, there for a time, carnival rides for a period of time, fairly long period of time. We had those. Those were kind of her contributions. The things in addition to the lighted vignettes would be kind of her contributions to it. And it's interesting. I've been in charge of it, and then I've watched a few other people be in charge ever since Linda retired. And it takes a little different turn, which each person's like input and creativity. But at the end of the day, most of what you all remember when you come is that steady kind of thing that Vinny does.
Putting
He
up
just
the
kind of
lights.
moves it around, that magic, right? Putting the lights up, because that's what it is. It's a lit woodland path, and not everybody does that anymore. A lot of places go to drive-throughs. They're
Right.
really easy. Trust me, I've done them myself with my kids. But there's nothing quite like the setting we can provide, and that pond in the back and that view is relatively unique. So
Yeah.
we hope to keep going. We get multiple generations coming to that event every year. You know, they've been coming since they were kids, and now they're bringing their grandchildren.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fun for me as an adult because, you know, we want to walk more anyway. And so it's nice that it is a walking tour that you can enjoy, get wrapped up and
Depending on the
enjoy.
weather.
Yeah, that's true. We have gone in the rain a few times, which isn't.
That's sometimes not,
Yeah.
well, it depends on the temperature and how much rain is falling, but sometimes that's a quieter night in the park, and it's sometimes easier to see everything.
Right, right. And everything looks more sparkly because of the rain.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So how did you become involved in the Americana Festival? I guess.
Well, this is an easy one. So I mentioned earlier that their offices are in the township hall. They're on the second floor, and they happen to be next to mine. And so Jim Reppert, who was a former council member, was really the founder of the event, executive director for a really long time. And we were office mates. I mean, is the honest truth, right? We were there for 20 years working together, right next to each other. So close proximity to an all-volunteer organization is going to rub off eventually, and it did. And they get you, just like any other organization, something small, and it won't take too much time. And for Jim, he really valued and prioritized duty to community. And somehow that rubbed off too, and probably more so than just the volunteer time. It was in response to this idea that it does matter. And I did not grow up that way. We lived out in the country, and we weren't community oriented. We were church oriented, right? You have those kind of normal things and maybe school, but not the community as a whole. And Jim really kind of opened my eyes to that, and he saw it as a duty, and so that got instilled, and so I had to volunteer then, right? But that's why I stay. And Americana is a very interesting group because I'm part of the Optimists, and I've been part of other organizations in town. And that's not to say that the other organizations are all this, but there's really no networking. There is no social benefit to Americana. We don't all hang out, except when it's time to do the show, putting the show on. And maybe that's why it appeals to me.
Because it's a show.
Yeah, and it's all walks of life. So it's not the normal folks that you might see that are going to be on your boards and committees. It's really just doers. It's a group of doers who come from all different walks of life, who are committed to this idea of celebrating Independence Day and putting on the best event for our community. And it's fun to be a part of that. It's a lot of work. For 1 day or 2 days there. But it's fun to see it all come together. And like I said, it's mostly project oriented. It reminds me of I think they call it destination imagination in schools, where there's a lot of creativity. That's what we do. That's all we do. And we do it all year. You know, we've got a meeting coming up
already.
Yeah, and we'll get ready for the next year's event. So, and I think it will be our 52nd year coming up.
Yeah.
So
to me, it takes such courage to do these events. And you talk about, I mean, we do have a great community of people who believe in causes and want to be involved, and we're very fortunate that way. I mean, I expect lots of other places don't have that. It is a great thing, but people do. It does take time out of other things, and committing that time is a gift to the community. So we appreciate your time and the effort to make it a wonderful event for us to enjoy. And
there's a lot of people involved in that organization that make it happen.
So we were going to talk about the fireworks mishap because you said you would.
No.
Because I'm sure there's things that go wrong every year.
Oh, yeah,
but we may not even see or recognize what those are. But
That's a perfect example,
yeah.
because I don't know how many times the fireworks have not gone as planned. That was the first time really that people noticed, I guess.
Was it
right?
it wasn't this,
It was the year before.
2022? I think it was 2022.
Yes, it was 2022.
Okay.
COVID threw me for a loop there. I'm like, we didn't do a show in that year.
Right.
Yeah, it got to an obvious level, I think. I mean, everyone that was there saw that. Fireworks, you've got weather.
Yeah.
But they're also, it's gunpowder and a fuse. And I was struck recently. I was at the Ohio Parks and Rec Association conference, and there's a table there, and our vendor for Americana is there, the firework vendor. And I'm like, they have like fireworks cut in half so you can kind of see how they're made, one of those things. And I'm like, they're really basic. And even in this day and age, we synchronize the music, we do all these other things, but at the end of the day, you're shooting a bunch of gunpowder up in the air, and it's timed and packed in a certain way so it's not high tech, not as high tech as you think. And so it's subject to problems, I guess. So, but that year especially was pretty bad. And a lot of times you'll get a little credit, right? That'll carry over into your next year. And like, hey, a few of these didn't go off. We'll give you credit for next year's show. But this was a little more substantial. I think the thing we weren't anticipating was how the community would take notice, right?
And get angry.
and get angry and get angry at the wrong people, right? So we're, the city and the township officials, well, you guys messed up our fireworks show. They're not involved. I mean, they provide some funding to the organization. There was this idea that they funded the fireworks. They don't really. It all goes into a pot, and then we parcel it out for the 5K and the parade and all these different things. It doesn't belie the fact that the taxpayer funds are supporting the event for sure. But we also don't fire the fireworks. And it was also it seemed obvious that we would know also that the fireworks were bad. And clearly we're not going to pay for the show if it's that bad. But a lot of people thought we might. In the end, we were able to work with the vendor, and we did not pay for that show. We had a small deposit that we paid. That was the only amount paid for that particular show. And then we started to look at options. It was hard. The vendor that we'd worked with for years was the vendor responsible for that year. So is it a one-off? Is it just a bad year? And it was hard after all of that hullabaloo to stay. So we switched vendors, and we had a great show. I was there. So there's kind of John Westney, who's the superintendent of schools, is the chairman of the board. I'm the president, and Keith Weiskettle is the executive director. And if you ask any one of the three of us, I don't know which roles we play.
You work
but
together.
We all were like high-fiving because the show seemed to come off.
You're
and
like,
it was yeah. And the funny thing was, the year it was bad, 22, was the first year I had been able to take my family, because we were local at this point. Because when I lived out in Greene County, when I got done with the other events that night, I rarely was able to stay for the fireworks. Right. And so we'd say, and they loved it. They thought it was amazing.
But
I knew watching, and I was like, that's not what we paid for. I know for a fact that this was supposed to go longer, and I saw that there wasn't the finale. So like, people did notice that, but the kids, they had a great time. So
yeah, and when they're so young, they don't necessarily know what's expected. So it's all fun for them.
Expectations are very high in this community.
They are. So, and that's good. People have standards, and that's a great thing, and we appreciate that. So going back to your service, why do you think it's important to be involved in your community?
Well, I mean, I talked a little bit about Jim Reppert. I think this idea, so he was a veteran, so he likened it very similarly to honor to country. And that service was part of that. And for him, it was giving back to your community, because without that, you don't have these things. And I also see by doing it that not everybody can or does. And so if you can or have an aptitude or a desire, then it's even more so a duty in some ways. What I've struggled with is so I had kids a little later in life, and my kids are now 10, 8, 6. And balancing volunteer time with that time is really, really hard. And I know why it's hard to get volunteers, precisely because of that. But, we have a lot of volunteers in our community, and I think people pick the spheres of volunteerism in their lives. if anything I've noticed as I've gotten family is that my focus typically has been external. But, there are opportunities when your kids are in school, sports, to volunteer there. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, how does this balance between what, I learned from Jim Reppert, right? Like
Right.
civic, community oriented versus like what you also want to do in your own life as well. So time is precious. But it's what makes this community special to me, to be perfectly honest, is this network of everybody coming together to make these things happen together. And we do it. I get to work on it from a municipal standpoint because I work in the government and we have partnerships with all these nonprofits. But without all those people working together, you wouldn't have Americana Festival. You wouldn't have the ice cream social. You wouldn't have the touch trucks. You wouldn't have the holiday walk. So many different people come together to make those things happen that people don't see. And that's what makes this community super fun to be a part of.
Yeah, and then we want them to come and enjoy it as well.
Right. And that they do.
Yeah.
I would tell you, especially since COVID, it seems that the appetite for these outdoor or not even outdoor, just events in general is tremendous.
It's coming
We've seen our numbers coming up. You take something like the Fall Fest at Stubbs Park. I mean, it's just gone astronomical each year. And town hall audiences have bucked the norm elsewhere. A lot of theaters have continued to struggle. Town hall hasn't. Town hall rebounded once we finally reopened. People wanted to go out again, and that's why Uptown is so successful right now. So our community likes to get out and do things. I'm a bit of a homebody, so I don't always understand it. I know that may sound weird, but I am. But people love to go out and get out in this community and do stuff.
Well, I know I do. I I think the more you work outside of the home, I think you want to be home.
I think that's what it is.
And so
I always joke that I hate street festivals. They're just too tight. There's too many people around, and people go, "Well, why are you involved with Americana?" And I'm like, "Jim Reppert, some guy got me."
That's true.
I got suckered in, and
well, and when you say suckered in, it's really because we value the people and we want to work with the people.
You do.
Hanging around with people who are community volunteers, it just lifts your spirit. So it's great to be around those kind of people. That's what I choose to be around, people that are good community volunteers, and it makes me better as well. Okay, so going back to relaxing, how do you relax? What do you do for relax? It seems like you're a very busy person.
I am. I think that we had an icebreaker at work today, and I said, "What would you do if you had no obligations on a Saturday? What would you do?" And I felt bad because my first response was like, nothing. I would go to I still have the farm that we lived on. I would go there, and I didn't bring my kids or wife, right? I was just like very purely selfish. Just like, I would just go out to the farm, just me, and like hang out that day. That's what I would do if I had nothing on a Saturday. And of course, the person who goes right after me is like, "Oh, I would want to spend time with my wife and children." And I'm like, well, of course I do. But like, that was my go-to. I was like, man, I need a moment. I just need a moment to process.
To regroup.
Yeah. I'm definitely a person who needs that, go back to the cave and recharge to keep my momentum up at work or like at the festival or whatever. But so I do. So we my wife is a pharmacist, and she had done her residency at Ohio State, and we rented a farm out in Greene County that was a little bit closer kind of to Columbus at the time, and I could commute back to work, and it reignited all this stuff that I remembered from my childhood. And before I knew it, I had some chickens, and then I had some turkeys, and then we had never had any more than that at home. And I decided to get pigs because I always wanted something, a real animal to raise, real livestock. And that's been a journey of love for me. So I do enjoy raising pigs. But what happened is, for us, is this has always been home. Certainly since I came to live here. And so as you have kids and you get more and more involved, it just gets harder and harder to have that commute. And with school starting and all those things, everything was here except what my wife called my unicorn, which she'd read a book and it was like, your unicorn is your special
The
thing.
thing
But
that makes you happy.
well, yes, but that is exclusive to you. So it's nobody else is really loving this as much as you do. And that was kind of true. And it's still that way. So now I haven't quite let go of it. So I have, we have a pair of donkeys and I've got a boar and a sow and piglets occasionally, that sort of thing out there. So probably not sustainable, but that's what I do to unwind now. Or we play a lot of backyard football in our family these days, and it's a lot of fun. So I do that almost every night if I can squeeze it in. So I do enjoy that piece of it. So
with 3 boys, it's good to get outside and do that. And I think that sounds like fun, especially because, we talk about the history of Centerville being like a farm community. Not a lot of us have that experience of what it's like to have a farm, and you actually do. So,
well, that's the cool thing about this community is and people, like, you blink and it was just yesterday when it was all fields and farms. And so I live over on Grants Trail, and I think about Normandy Farm and how I was in the back pasture, probably, right? That's where my house is, and down the hill, and then that they had their summer home or cottage or whatever that was over at the Chimneys at Grant. And I'm like, this was all like one guy's farm, and now look at us all over it. And it wasn't that long ago. I'm 50 years old. I was born in 73, and our house was built in 72. So I'm as old as this is. Prior to that, there were cows probably standing here, and because I like that, it's interesting to me that just a few years removed, there were still outhouses and things like that. I used to tease Vicky Bondi a lot at your organization about putting real chickens in that chicken coop without permission sometimes. So, because I want people to remember it's for real. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah, we have some stuffed chickens in there now.
I'm aware that you do. It is still a sore subject.
Because none of us really want to take care of them. That's the reason.
That's my dream job. I want to come work for you and just manage your chicken
That'd be
coop.
awesome. I actually would love chickens in my backyard. But then you got to take care of them.
Yeah.
So. All right. Well, there's still so much to talk about. What makes this community special to you?
Well, we talked a little bit about it. It's this idea that we really come together a lot. And one of the things I talk about with Americana is it's like, it feels a little bit like our family reunion. And so you'll see everybody that you didn't see the rest of the year there. It's pretty unusual not to run into people.
That's so true. Yeah.
For me, part of that is just so I was at town hall for so long. Sometimes that's the best time to reach, like, I'll just stand up there and I'll see people that I haven't seen in years. So I think that I always thought a family reunion, that's what that is. And not every community has that or values that. And I think we do. I think we have extraordinary public agencies, the parks, 51 parks in one little community. You say that number and people go, what? I told that to somebody recently at the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they were like, is that right? And I was like, well, that includes neighborhood parks, but yes, that's right. And there's some pretty nice larger parks in the community as well. So you have that, and you have some really amazing libraries. You have the Centerville-Washington history. Not every place has as active or involved historical society at all, in multiple buildings, staff, all of that. It's not that you can only get in there for like 2 hours on a Saturday morning because that's the only time somebody staffs the one room in this building, which a lot of towns have that. I think you also have incredible amounts of people who care deeply. I've had the opportunity to work on levy committees throughout my career, and that's something not a lot of people know about. But, for a levy, in order to advocate, that's all volunteer, right? And you got to find people that care enough about that too. And who wants to talk about taxes or go out on a limb just generally politically? And people are willing to do that, to put their name, to give money to those causes because they care about their parks, their libraries, their schools. And I would say the other thing that's really interesting to me is I feel like the collaborative spirit between those groups is really strong in our community. I think everyone's a phone call away from each other, and generally the answer is always yes. How can we do this? How can we work together and make this event or this whatever better? And that's really fun to work in an atmosphere like that. And I think those are things that make the community super strong. We're not all individually siloed. it can be somewhat confusing in a community that has different things separated. You have city, township, park district, also rec center, like with a park. The city also has a park, right? You can choose to look at those little divisive things that sometimes confuse voters even. Like, I don't understand. Aren't you Parks and Rec? I saw the show. Isn't that all one thing? I mean, I've had advisory board members that get confused, right? But the reality is it really functions that way anyways, because we work so closely together. It doesn't really matter. And I think that's a strength of the community. I think it's a fairly diverse community in the sense that lots of different age groups, lots of different community neighborhoods. There's just a lot of, and it's big enough to allow for all that, I think, depending on where you're at in the township. Each corner has its thing. And I think that makes, anytime you have some uniqueness in a community, that helps as well. And we have Bill's Donuts, which is really the best donuts ever. And not every community even has that. So there's just lots of cool things like that.
I was going to ask you, what are your favorite places?
Well,
I know you don't like to go places, but...
Oh, right.
So Bill's Donuts is a place
well,
like.
that the parking's easy there generally. No, people always say, well, it's like if you vote against Bill's Donuts, then you'd be a traitor. And I'm not even a big donut guy, but I do think that having those unique things, even if you didn't like donuts, you ought to be proud that you're home to Bill's Donuts. I mean, it's often one of the top donut places in the country, and we have that kind of thing. And we have 2 local chocolatiers in our community, Belbert Chocolates and Esther Price. And there may be more. I'm probably leaving somebody out, but there's coffee shops. There's just a lot of variety for a community our size, and I think that part's neat to me. Less chains, more individual stuff, and we have a lot of that, surprisingly, for a suburb.
Yeah, for a small little town. You mentioned Bill's Donuts. That is one of the places that when my family comes to visit, that's the place that we'll be waiting in line, to get. And also my family loves to come to Americana in the summer. They don't all live around here, but it's just something that they grew up with, and it's where they want to be in the summertime, back here for Americana.
It's a big, big backyard party for sure.
Yeah, it is. Well, is there anything else? I feel like we've covered the range that I had intended.
Well, that's good. We don't want it to take too long, I guess.
No.
They'll tune into a different channel. I know. I think it was an interesting opportunity to talk. I mean, you listen to podcasts all the time, and what is it that's unique about, the RecPlex and just my role? I will say that my dad wasn't a big fan originally of me going into the theater. Didn't think it'd ever pay off, and there's me, and then Kate Trangenstein, who's the communications manager for Washington Township, has a theater background. And I go, you know what? The theater background, we're chameleons. We can act like we know what we're doing anywhere.
That's so funny.
But I think what happens is the skill sets translate a little bit. I remember distinctly feeling, we managed the theater at Town Hall, and we were always a bit of the stepchild, right? Theaters don't tend to their cost recovery is just not normal, right? The cost of theater, doing business in a theater is hard. It's why it's generally underwritten. There's lots of grants and public funding. And you just always feel that a bit. And when I came to Rec as the director, I saw firsthand, I felt like I was still at home with the same people. Same thing, right? Recreation isn't the fire department.
Yeah.
It's not necessary. I would argue that it is in a lot of ways, but it's not the same. It's not as obvious as putting out a fire or the police or even public works during a snowstorm. Nobody's calling me to get them out of their driveway. Right. But I think that it was a similar tribe with the same passion, which is so unique to recreation in the theater. People want to give their best. They, obviously nobody works for free.
Right. Yeah.
But you get the sense often that they would. I guess that's what I'm saying, that there is a passion there for most people. If you stay in recreation, it typically doesn't pay that as well as other professions. And so if you stay, it's yes, you need your income, but there's a lot of passion and commitment and dedication. So get to work with that every day is really exciting. And I think it keeps it keeps it light. It keeps it focused on what your mission is, and it keeps it. There's a variety to it, and so the translation from theater to recreation, which on the surface was like, theater to like sports. What? That can't work, but it works really well. And I was surprised how similar a lot of that is. Mm-hmm. The drive behind why we do what we do is very similar.
Yeah. And I know it makes people happy being in that environment with a lot of people having a lot of endorphins, getting pumped up and exercising it's a happy place for people.
I would say, I would be remiss to say the theater was different for me because of my direct involvement in day to day and getting to know so many young performers over the years, mm-hmm. that that's the most significant impact I feel I've made. And so when I run into those people at Americana, or when I moved into town and ended up having neighbors who were former kids, or I'm like, how did this work? Mm-hmm. My son and I recently went to see To Kill a Mockingbird on the Broadway tour, came through town. And we had done the show at Town Hall years ago. I didn't realize how many years ago. But I had a book. I knew I had the book, and so I suggested to Aiden that we would read the book now. And so I pulled the book out last night, and it's the cast. It was the gift I got. In that time, I was not the director; I was the producer of that particular show. Mm-hmm. And all these names come flooding back, and that would have been from late '90s. And I know so many of their career, like what happened to those names. Not everyone. Then mm-hmm. you wondered, right? Mm-hmm. But and I said, Aiden, do you see this name here? Her husband is your flag football coach. But here she was, and she played Mrs. Dubois. And he's like, oh my gosh, so I to me, that will always be the most interesting part of that job, was watching what would happen once those kids kind of came through the program. And some went on to Broadway, and some went on and did what is what the expectation is. Like, wow, that's amazing. They became like a stage manager on Broadway, or then they're in this national tour, or whatever it is. But then so many people went off and did incredibly cool things outside of theater too. Mm-hmm. And it's just, that part was, I don't get that in the current job. I'm not as directly involved, but I know that my staff does. Mm-hmm. I know that, you've worked there as a lifeguard, and you had that opportunity to see what happens to guards as they grow up and mm-hmm. graduate, and you get to see that. But that will be forever a special place, I think, for me.
Yeah. And me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just a little plug for Centerville-Washington history. Some of the stories that we talked about today are in this book, A Sense of Community. So if you're interested in, you can pick that up on our website or come into one of the museums. And also a big thank you to MVCC for helping to produce this podcast, and of course my guest, Mark Metzger. If you have an interesting story about Centerville or Washington Township, please contact Centerville-Washington History. Please also come visit our museums Tuesday through Friday, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. in Uptown Centerville. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and watch for upcoming events on our website, CentervilleWashingtonHistory.org. Thank you and goodbye.